He was 6'1" and he was 450 pounds. How are you going to fight that off of you? I mean, he's got a major advantage there. He's a big boy. He's a big boy. By the early 90s, Joe was well known among the homeless population of South Baltimore, where he was living. His and temper were known among the community which he lived, but professionally he was considered dependable, intelligent, and well-mannered. That's usually how it always goes, right? He was able to hold a job as a truck driver. He ends up meeting this lady and they fall in love, I guess, and they get married and they end up having a child together. Now at this point, because Joe was working, he was able to pay for like a home. It was like a smaller trailer, but hey, it's a roof over his head. Like, that's great. But sadly, they were both addicts. So one night in 1994, Joe came home from work and it was late. It was late at night. He goes inside like he always did. It's his house, Bailey. He went inside his house. It was late at night. So he opens up the door and he turns on the lights and he notices that everything was gone. The furniture, pretty much the whole house was gone. Looking around the house, he doesn't see any sign of his wife. And he just knew instantly that she took their kid and she left. She moved out and she took all the stuff. And at that time, their son was 6 years old. So this was extremely upsetting to Joe. I mean, it would be to any of us, but you know, it ticked him off. So 6 months goes by, still no sign of his wife and child. So when he goes in by he finds out that his wife moved to the other side of town with another guy, and she was working as a worker, spending all of her money on, and that their son had been taken from her for child neglect and child. So when Joe finds this out, he's like, oh no. And Joe decided to take it upon himself to get his son back. Joe hears from others that his wife, or his ex-wife, she was currently living under a bridge with a group of homeless people. And that's where she was like getting, and she was working as a worker. And yeah, Joe goes around in the area looking for his ex-wife. So one night Joe goes down to this bridge where he knew that like all of the homeless community had lived. That's where they all like hung out. He goes to this bridge and that's where the person claimed his wife was. He sees these two homeless men. He asks them, hey, have you seen my wife? She took my kid. I'm looking for her, blah, blah, blah. And these two homeless men, they say like, no, I haven't seen her. Joe just did not want to accept that. Joe ends up both of these two homeless men. Now, according to Joe, this is the first time he's somebody. So he sees that there's a sex worker in the area. Joe then offers her some and like kind of lures her over under the bridge where he just the other two guys. He asked her if she knew where they were, his child, a whole spiel. She said no. So Joe was not satisfied with this answer. He was not satisfied with no's. He decided to and her as well. And then he hears somebody coming. He kind of panics, Joe. So he quickly gathers her poor body, puts her in a bush, and it's another worker coming down. Them. So then Joe notices a fisherman who was nearby. Joe wasn't sure if this fisherman saw anything or not, but he was like, you know what? I should kill this guy because he could have witnessed something. I'm not sure if he did, but he could have. Joe was like, I gotta get rid of him. Joe, in a confession, said, quote, it was a very busy night. 5 within about 7 hours, end quote. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot, Joe. A lot. He tried his best to clean up the crime scene, but he heard more people coming and he thought it'd be best if he just left at that point. So about 2.5 weeks go by and then Joe was linked to these that he did, and he was arrested and charged with the murders of the two men he first. Police at that time had no idea that there were more people that were around that same area. So Joe ends up spending a year and a half in jail while he was awaiting trial. Finally, it's his turn to like go up for his trial, and guess what? Joe ended up being acquitted due to lack of evidence. Joe gets out of jail. So Joe developed a pattern of befriending workers. He would attract them to his home and tell these workers that he would offer it to them, lure them back to his trailer. He was 6'1" and he was 450 pounds. How are you going to fight that off of you? I mean, he's got a major advantage there. He's a big boy. He's a big boy. So once Joe's victims passed out, he would them up. Oh my God. He then would put the meaty parts in some like Tupperware bowls, and then he would put them in the freezer. And then the parts that he didn't want to keep, he would bury them in shallow graves. This went on for quite some time. And we're not really sure how many victims there were. Joe said roughly about 10. So this is the really messed up part. And this might ruin things for you for a little bit. Okay? Joe's doing this, right? And he's working as like a truck driver, a local truck driver. But he wanted to earn a little extra money. So Joe was like, you know what? I'm going to open up like a little roadside open pit roast beef sandwich stand. Roast beef stand. Do you see where we're going with this? Roast beef stand? He had real roast beef and pork sandwiches. It was like on a main road that a lot of truck drivers were coming through. So he would kind of like just park it out there, have his little, his open pit, had a little sign, real roast beef and pork sandwiches. So people would stop and they would get these sandwiches. And Joe was like, yeah, people just loved it. Like he was making some nice extra money, and nobody ever complained about like the sandwiches or the food being bad. I mean, everybody just really liked them. What Joe would do is his roast beef and pork sandwiches, they needed some flavor. They needed some zest. They needed a touch of something special. Joe goes to the freezer and he gets that Tupperware. Well, he mixed that meat in with the roast beef and the pork. And Joe tried it before actually selling it. And he said, hey, this meat tastes exactly like pork and you can't even tell a difference. For weeks, Joe had this stand going. It was going strong and people were loving it. And unfortunately, we don't know how many people came and went there. Just people driving by, the truckers, townies, and essentially they were becoming living hiding spots for the bodies of Joe's victims. So at some point, he runs out of this special meat. So one night, Joe lures another poor worker back to his trailer. And once they got back into his trailer, he shuts the door and then he attempts to knock her out. She, the victim, falls to the ground and Joe thinks she's knocked out, she's passed out, something. He said, just turned around for a split second, the victim was able to get up and run out of the door. At first, Joe was thinking, oh, she got out, but there was also an 8-foot chain link fence with barbed wire on top of it around the front of his yard. So he's thinking yeah, she got out, but there's no way she's gonna get away. But luckily for her, there was a stack of wooden pallets, which was next to the fence. So she was able to hop onto that and then hop over. Luckily for her, she got over and she made a run for it. And she just ran down to the main road. She flagged down a truck driver. She tells the truck driver the whole story. This guy just tried to kill me, and they both go to a nearby gas station, and that's where they called the police. Joe knew as soon as she got over that fence, he knew the game was over. He said in an interview he just waited outside for the police to come because he knew that they were coming. And he was right. Pretty quickly after she got out, police arrived and they arrested Joe. This was in 1996. They take him down to jail. He gives a pretty lengthy confession. Eventually, he was found guilty and he was sentenced to death. But it was overturned in 2000. It was instead changed to 2 life sentences, which meant that he was never going to see the light of day again, which is great. At his sentencing, he requested to be put to death and said, quote, the words, I'm sorry, will never come out, for they would be a lie. I am more than willing to give up my life for what I have done, to have God judge me and send me to hell for eternity. From my understanding, he was never convicted for like tampering with food, which is a felony, because there was no actual proof of it. He told people that he did it. In his confession, he said that he did it, but there was no like proof that he did it, and people ate the evidence. So it could be untrue. Joe told police officers, quote, "The only thing I feel bad about in any of this is I didn't get to murder the two I was really after. And that's my ex-lady and the she hooked up with." End quote. In August of 2017, Joe was found unresponsive in his prison cell. He was 62 years old at the time. I hope you have a wonderful day. Be safe, make good choices, and I'll be seeing you guys later. Bye. Thank you.